you everybody for being here for MMJ seminar. OCASA is hosting it. And if you're not familiar, we're the Oklahoma Compost and Sustainability Association. And we do outreach and education about compost primarily, but also sustainability in Oklahoma. You can check us out on all media at OK Compost, and our website is okcompost.org. We are going to have events all throughout the spring, so please follow us if you're interested in learning more about compost and sustainability. Okay, so we have a structure here of 3 speakers. We're going to have 30 minutes for each speaker, 5-minute break in between, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. We are going to start with Nick Messick from Enzo. And Nick, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. First off, thank you to the conference for inviting us to present today. We're excited about the opportunity to be involved with this seminar and, to get awareness out about what we offer, the services we provide, and, that the waste that we do pick up is repurposed in a meaningful and environmentally friendly way. So, yeah. Okay, so Enzo Solutions, we are an OMMA licensed waste disposal company. We've been operating since May of 2020. Our location is just south of downtown Oklahoma City. We do run a fleet of trucks that service the entire state of Oklahoma. And in fact, we have coverage in all 4 corners of the state, from Altus to Miami and from Guyman to Broken Bow. So wherever your business may be located, we are in the area. Our mission is a relatively simple one, and that is to ensure that the cannabis waste that we pick up is repurposed in a meaningful and environmentally friendly way. I'll get into how we accomplish that, and as we move along here, but that is the foundation that we're built upon, and we're proud of what we've been able to accomplish thus far. As far as what we offer, we've got solutions for all of the OMMA's requirements with regards to waste disposal and waste management. That can be whether it be storage, transport, or disposal of cannabis waste in the various forms that this industry encounters. So, and again, I'll get into how we accomplish that as well as we move forward. We are also very proud of the fact that our entire team is native Oklahoman, owned and operated. We know there are many transplants here in this industry from out of state, and of course we welcome them. However, our team is 100% native Oklahoman, and like I said, we're proud of that fact, and also that we are an employee-owned company. So anybody that you may encounter, out in the field, our drivers included, everybody is a part of this business. And yeah, so Mark, if you want to flip to the next one. So this is our process, so to speak, of how we go about handling everything that we collect. So we service all types of licenses, whether that's growers, processors, or dispensaries. And we have a variety of options for completing that. So when it comes to storage of the waste and what we pick it up in, we have a range from 5-gallon containers for dispensaries, all the way to 14 cubic yard dumpsters for large operations, whether that be growers or processors. And we have, and in between there, we have wheeled poly carts for collecting waste at growers and processors as well. The dumpsters, we fabricate a steel locking lid on those in-house. So we take care of everything here. All of the containers that we provide are equipped with a lock and correct labeling to satisfy the OMMA's security and storage requirements. So then as we bring the material in on one of the fleet of trucks that we run across the state, it goes into sorting once it arrives on site here at the disposal facility. And we have 8 different classifications of waste that we work with, and those are separated by moisture content. And so when we're talking about feedstocks for composting, it's important to understand how much moisture, how much water retention is in that feedstock that's going in to our process. And so we then start to move material around the facility based upon those different classifications. When it comes to grow waste, specifically root balls, stems, stalks, and fan leaves, those are sent to a slow speed twin shaft grinder to reduce our particle size down to 1 to 2 inches, which expedites the composting process, which we're certainly interested in doing. So that grinder, we searched far and wide for the right equipment. It was a trial and error process, but we ended up settling on one that was used in the Caribbean for sugarcane processing, which has a nice application very similar to what we were in need of, and the equipment we've brought on site has been fantastic for that. So once all the feedstocks are sorted, again, those depend on the moisture content. The grow waste will depend on how long that material has been drying out and how long when we come in contact with it. The flour or trim from the processors post extraction depends on whether they're using, fresh frozen biomass, or also what type of solvent they're using for extraction, whether it be CO2, butane, ethanol. And we also pick up from the solventless processors as well, which, as you can imagine, they use the ice water extraction. So that material is very high moisture content once we get our hands on it. So the next step we have there is to build a recipe. We have a software that has all of those classifications in it, the moisture contents that go with each of those. And so we look at what we have in inventory that we've brought in that day. The objective there is to balance the carbon to nitrogen ratio and moisture content to build that recipe for loading into our composter. So once we get the recipe made, the ingredients that we use are strictly limited to cannabis waste, shredded trees from a local tree removal service that drops those wood chips off to us, and water. So it is it's very limited ingredients that go into our compost recipe. And then the completed, once the recipe is made, that batch is loaded into our composter on the load end using a skid steer, and we do load it every day, and that includes even on the weekends with the amount of material that we're bringing in. So Mark, if you want to flip to the next slide to give a look at what the machine we have is there. So you'll notice first off on that left image that it is a shipping container. There is an aeration system built into the floor, adding oxygen to that mix. There is a 4-foot auger that you see on that right picture that runs all the way down to the floor, and it moves on that carriage system in different patterns. We have the programming on that machine can run one of a number of different mixing patterns depending upon where we are in the cycle of that batch and what we're looking to accomplish next. So we can move the material to the discharge end if we're preparing to load, or I'm sorry, to remove compost out of the back end. If we've just loaded compost, we can run a load cycle, which attempts to mix that fresh recipe in with the existing pile that's moving along through the process. So that container does have insulated walls, and you can see the ceiling there. That helps us manage the temperature, which in composting is obviously a very important element to keep track of. And so our vessel, we check the temperatures on it twice a day, and it runs and checks anywhere between 131 and 150 on a regular basis. We kind of target that the 140s as a good place to keep this moving along. So that auger, as it moves through there, it tears up the clumps to increase the surface area available to the microbes, and it kind of fluffs the compost to continually add oxygen, as well as that, like I said, the aeration system in the floor does that as well. So if you'll notice on the picture on the right, on the top left side of the vessel, there is a PVC pipe that you see there, and that is the ventilation system. Yes, thank you there, Mark. That's the ventilation system that we have to keep odor control and mitigate that. And where that there's a blower on the other side of that that's pulling those vapors out of the vessel through PVC and ultimately outdoors, but first into a pit that we've built of pine bark. And so the PVC has a bunch of holes in it that are in the bottom of this pit of pine bark. And as those vapors rise up, the bacteria on the pine bark actually eat those vapors and do a fantastic job of eliminating the odor that is obviously created when you're composting. So that was a system designed by the manufacturer of this composting machine, and it's incredibly effective. We had reservations about the odor when we were looking at this product, and I have to say I'm still rather shocked by how effective that it is at keeping those odors down. So once the vessel's loaded, the feedstock remains in there for 10 days is the retention time we're running right now. So it is fed on a daily basis. And so we are then dumping or unloading compost out of the discharge end about every 2 to 3 days. The mixture shrinks while it's inside there. So there's not a need to unload it on a daily basis, but we lose about 40% of the mass as it runs through the composting process. And so like I said, we unload it about every 2 to 3 days, and that's done using a skid steer as well. And so the compost at that point goes to curing piles, and it resides in those piles for a minimum of 25 days. We do turn them and add water, and we're still experimenting a bit with that process, and really with all of this, as we're really the only business right now that's using this machine for cannabis composting. It's only been used until we came along for food waste, and so we track the inputs and the recipe and then all of our processes, and then we relay that information on to the manufacturer of this machine, who also provides consulting services to us. And so as they take a look at what we're doing exactly, and then also the soil test results that we have the compost tested as it finishes curing. And so all of that information is sent to our consultant, and then they're continually making recommendations on how to improve that compost that we're creating. So it is tested for THC content as well. I can tell you every test that we have run thus far is showing anywhere from 0.01 to 0.02% THC left. So it is an incredibly effective machine at eliminating the THC, and then also any pathogens, bacteria, as we do a full soil test analysis on this to show us, what we're ultimately ending up with. And so that compost is then either being donated or sold to various outlets. It's not being used in any cannabis operations at the moment, as we are still in the process of refining the compost that we're making. And so that more or less sums up, what our process is for taking the cannabis waste that the industry generates and turning it into a living soil. So I think at this point, I'm certainly open to and happy to open it up for questions. If anybody has any, I believe you can submit them through the chat or hop on the microphone. So happy to take those from you and hope to be able to answer them accordingly.
So Mark asked, how often do you need to refresh the pine bark? Which was a question I wrote down as well, Mark.
Sure. So the pine bark is replaced on an annual basis. The size of the pit is, I could double check this for you, but I believe it is 4 foot by 9 foot, and then it stands 4 foot tall. So, and that system was designed by the manufacturer of the vessel, and the vessel, the size of that they call it a biofilter, and the size of that is a function of the size of the composter and what goes in it in the process. So, like I said earlier, it is incredibly effective at what it's designed to do, and environmentally friendly as well. So pretty impressive.
What do you do with the pine bark once you have to refresh it? Do you go ahead and compost it?
That is a great question. I do not know the answer to. We just replaced it a couple of months ago. I was not involved in that process. I would imagine that yes, it did go into the vessel, but my operations supervisor is not here, and I can find that out, but I don't know. I can't guarantee or tell you with certainty what was done with that.
I'm really interested in this pine bark thing. Do you know, or does anybody else know if anyone else is doing that to basically scrub odors for any other facility or site?
Well, I know that the biofilter system they have recommended for all of their customers that use these machines, and so they vary in size and also shape and material used for at least the shell. They're pretty flexible on how you accomplish it. They just they tell you the size that it needs to be and fill the box with pine bark and let it run its course. So yeah, that's about all. But I do know that this was not something new to our machine. It's a part of this that they've been involved in designing for quite some time.
Another question from me, sorry. I'll move on from the pine bark though. I can't remember if you said total input. I know you said you're putting stuff in every day, pulling out every 2 to 3 days. Are you able to share what your volume is? I know it dropped by 40%, but inputs, how much compost are you producing a week or a month?
Sure. So right now, compost we're producing is approaching 50 yards a month. I think we're right now in the high 40s. So I think this month we'll probably do about 50 yards of compost. So if that's and I can tell you we have outgrown this system. And so We are working on, increasing our capacity through a site-built composting system where we construct the floor, the walls, and the roof of the vessel, and then the Green Mountain Technologies supplies the carriage system, the aeration system, all of the components, and that's all installed on the shell that we build. And they have, that's not a new concept. They do that. You can look at their website and see those systems in place. Those are very customizable, but it's going to allow us to, feed more, bring in more material and compost it, as, like I said, we are approaching capacity of this current system. So yeah, we're excited about that. Absolutely.
Okay, so Casey would like to know where the finished product ends up. You said that some of it is donated, some of it is used. Can you expand more on that?
Right now, it's we either are sending it to tree farms. There are fruit and nut orchards that find the compost that we make, the end product, to be incredibly effective for that application, because we do not screen it. And so our compost is somewhere between a cover mulch and a fine soil. So it may not be applicable in its current form for a lot of what someone who's looking for compost may be thinking of fine dirt, and this does still have larger particles in it. And so the tree farms, specifically the orchards, tend to find it incredibly effective for those needs and applications. And so that is where most of everything is ending up. So we as we are, as I stated earlier, this process is still evolving. We're still refining this compost that we make. And so that is being donated to some of those outlets on a trial basis to, use it, apply it, find out, what kind of results. The feedback from everyone who's taken it has been, I've never had results like this. I have one orchard who they plant a new orchard every year on the same tract of land, and he used it for the first full year on a new orchard that went in January of 2021. And this was the soil, fertilizer that he used for that entire year. And he said it was the best year one results he's had in close to 2 decades at that orchard. So I do know that what we have is certainly unique and appears to be very well suited if used in the right application. The nitrogen in the compost is very high, and so I know that if it is going to be used for seedlings or very young plants, that it does need to be mixed like you would with any nitrogen application, because it can be too hot for what you're doing. So that's probably the long answer for what you were looking for.
So last question, Cindy asks, since you are placing uncomposted or raw material in the same vessel as material in the process of composting, how do you ensure all of the material is subjected to greater than 131 degrees Fahrenheit for a minimum of 10 days?
Sure. So we are governed by a DEQ permit, which states to complete the thermophilic composting process, the feedstock needs to be over 131 degrees for a minimum of 3 days. And so that's what we have to accomplish. we test both sides of the vessel twice a day. So the load end, where we load the recipe each day, is tested, and then as well as the discharge end. And those we have a log of those temps when DEQ is ever interested in that, but it's continually run in the 140s. The machine is so well insulated and such a closed environment that you can really monitor and control the temperature with adding water or not, and also aerating the mixture or not. And so we've been doing this now for close to 2 years. We have it very dialed in on managing that temperature, which is really impressive. It doesn't matter whether it's 100 degrees outside or 15 like it was a couple of weeks ago. This environment is so closed that it manages to stay consistent. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Nick. Okay, everybody, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So be back here 10:36, stretch, pet your dog, get excited for the next session, and we will see you soon.
Thank you again to the conference. Bye-bye.
Hope everybody had a good break. Looks like Jason is really enjoying his. Michaela, are you ready to give your presentation for your dad? Just kidding. I'm sure he will be back soon. All right, Jason is here. Jason Huffaker is one of our board members. He's been with OCASA since the very beginning, and we are excited to hear him talk about soils. So Jason, I'll let you get started.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, glad to be here, and we'll talk a little bit about compost and soil and what compost does for soil and the microbial activity and how that helps plants stay healthier and grow. So yeah, there's a beautiful slide there for you. Since we were talking about cannabis, we got some pictures of it there for you so everybody can see what that is. Let's go to the next one there, Mark. And so there's my pretty mug, and like I said, I'm with Eleva Soils, and we are a potting soil manufacturer here in Blanchard, and we make potting soils for all different types of people, from organic gardeners to cannabis growers. You can go ahead and fade to that next one, Mark. So we all know that compost is a great product, and you can use compost in a lot of different ways. You heard Nick mention earlier how their product is really between like a mulch type layer to a finer humus, and you can use that product for a lot of different things, whether you top dress or amend it into native soils. You can even use it for tea brews, which helps inoculate the water and oxygenate the water that you can then use in your gardens and help inoculate that soil and increase the microbial activities. Next. So we're going to talk about soil structure today, and soil structure is a very important part of any garden or farm. And in the state of Oklahoma, as we know, we have a lot of clay soil. Depending on where you're at, some of us have a sandier soil if you're out towards the east of town. And compost helps in all of those areas. In a clay soil, compost will help loosen those platelets and allow moisture penetration and open up the micro and macro pores to where water can then infiltrate that soil at a quicker rate. And then more importantly, retain that moisture, which stabilizes that soil and gives a much better root zone for the plants to grow in. So Mark, let's go to that next one. So soil structure refers to the way sand, silt, and clay particles are arranged. So for those that don't know, there's 3 ingredients to all of our soils. The native soil I'm talking about, not in particular potting soils. So when you're talking about a native soil, you always have a sand, silt, and clay content. And the percentages of those 3 items determine what type of soil you have. So if you have a clay soil, a clay loam, then you'll have obviously a higher percentage of clay in your native soil, or you could have a higher silt content giving you a silty loam, or you can have a sandy loam. A lot of people like a sandy loam because of the infiltration rate. Sandier soils obviously allow that water to penetrate further and faster. However, when we are in the middle of summer, obviously when our rains slow in this, obviously we would need to retain that moisture in the soil for a greater period of time, and compost is the answer to that. So not only does compost help the clay soils, it also helps the sandy soils or the silt soils. So it either is increasing or decreasing the aggregates in the soil structure itself. So when you see a good soil, you'll have the small clumps that you see I have written down there. Large empty spaces between the aggregates, the macropores. And when I say large spaces, those are not spaces that you and I can see. Those are very small openings within the soil that the compost is attached to all those particles and created those small clumps. The other thing that it does is it allows air into the soil. So, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit further in the presentation, but one of the things that we have an issue with in any native soil is compaction. So whether we're using equipment, even foot traffic or animal traffic, anything like that, compacts our native soils, making it harder for the rain or irrigation to penetrate. Now, the funny part is, and some things that one of the things that people overlook is that rain actually can compact our soil as well. You figure you've got a small particle of moisture coming out of the sky, falling at a very fast rate, and when it hits the soil, it compacts. So some of the things that help that are quality structure to our soil, but also a mulch layer or a higher organic content in our soil. And then we'll speak to oxygen here in a little bit. Let's go to the next one real quick, the next slide. So we've talked about some of this already, but granular structure helps hold water and nutrients, gives us better drainage and aeration, which enables us to have a better root development. The soil obviously works a lot easier. I mean, for those of you who might have a garden area where you've put compost or you've allowed cover crops to flourish and then decompose in the fall, or where leaves have accumulated, you'll notice that when you go to plant your bulbs or your plants, you can easily dig into the soil, and that is directly related to the amount of organic matter that you have in your soil, creating that structure we were talking about earlier, that looser structure, and having those micro macro pores in there. The other thing that does is give us a biological activity, something that I feel is way overlooked, whether it's in your front yard or it's in your native soil where you're growing your rose bushes or your tomatoes or whatever. All too often, because of a lack of knowledge about biological activity and soil structure and soil health, we tend to try and recreate that activity by adding commercial fertilizers. While that works in the short term, in the long term, what it affects is the plant's health, the root structure, and also the end result, the fruit that we're looking for, whether it's a beautiful flower or whether it's a really nice tomato with flavor and color and so forth. The big thing is it also helps the erosion and compaction, which we talked about a little bit, but more importantly, erosion. And the reason that it works for erosion is that we're holding the moisture on site and not allowing it to run off. You'll notice sometimes when soil is very dry and you pour water in the pool on top rather than penetrate. When I was a young man, my grandfather would tell me, look, the soil's so thirsty, it doesn't know to drink. Well, that was a funny way, I guess, to explain that what happened was the soil is either compacted or doesn't have enough organic content to absorb that moisture. By working in the compost, you help eliminate those issues while creating a more healthy environment for not only the plant, but also good bugs. So I believe if we'll go to the next slide, Mark, we can dissect that deeper. So I put a picture there to the side, and you can see, obviously, from the top to the bottom where the cover crop, the grasses there are growing. And you can see how, as you'll see that dark area of soil and how that looks nice and loose. And then you get down a little deeper, you get to that lighter brown soil that doesn't have the compost or quality soil or structure that we're looking for. Really, it's the structure. And so you can see the roots have penetrated all the way down to that lighter brown area and then stopped. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is obviously it's more compact and harder for the roots to enter that area. The other reason is a lack of oxygen, and that is where in the lack of oxygen area, and in compost production, we talk a lot about the biological, whether it's anaerobic or aerobic. And when you get to a compacted soil where you don't have oxygen in the soil, you get anaerobic activities, and the microorganisms in that soil actually attack roots and attack the plant, whereas in the soil that has the oxygenated soil and the microbial activity in that soil, those bugs actually help fight off and resist those and coat the plant's roots to keep them from being able to come in. So as you can see, it's not being properly incorporated with mulch or organic matter, basically, from the get-go. Whereas if we do simple processes to change that by adding compost from people like Nick, then we're able to improve that soil structure and have a much healthier plant. Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk some more about that. So we were talking about compost with Nick. There's multiple types of compost. Green waste, manure, leaf mold, vermicompost, food waste, and a combination thereof. So all of those composts are good. Let's go to the next slide. I believe I've got some pictures. Hope I know my presentation. Yeah, so not all composts are created equal, and not all composts are going to work for your application. However, you may need a combination of different composts. Each compost, depending on its input stocks and the way that it's composted, have different types of microbial activity. So one of my favorites is a vermicompost. You can't get much more broke down than vermicompost. It is at an actual all the way broke to a humus state. Great for moisture holding capacity, really good for a CEC ratio. Those that don't know that, we'll explain that in just a little bit. So that's a cation exchange capacity. So that's its ability, that's the compost's ability to absorb moisture, absorb nutrients, or more importantly, they've already broke down nutrients to a plant available state. And there's the key. Just because we add what people think is compost doesn't mean that it's at a state where it's broke down and a plant can absorb it. So again, that's why we may need something like vermicompost and maybe some hardwood type compost. Some people like manure-based compost, some people don't. I do like manure-based compost for 60 to 70% of all applications. Manure-based compost is a fantastic product. However, sometimes you need the particle size of something like Nick was talking about earlier, because those particle sizes get into the soil itself and help develop a structure that enables more penetration. Something that we can use also for penetration that Nick was talking about earlier, and I wrote down on my notes here to share, was pine bark is an excellent soil amendment. Nick was talking to the biological activity of the pine bark absorbing the odors and the bacteria, basically, to help eliminate smells. The same thing, pine bark does that same thing in your soil and actually creates little pockets in your soil of microbial activity. So sometimes, so to have a huge population of microbial activity is important. However, having a diverse population is more important. So we'll go to the next slide. Yeah, okay, so we're going to talk about this a little bit. Do your research before you buy your compost. Not only may you need different types of compost, but and it's not, again, all about the organic matter, it's also about the diversity. So knowing what you're buying and getting a high quality compost is very important. And one of the best ways to do that is research through the U.S. Composting Council. They have a program called STA, certified. It's certified compost through the U.S. Composting Council. There's protocols that each composter has to go through and send it off to a third-party testing. This doesn't only ensure that you're getting a high-quality compost, but it also tells you, because they all have testing results, and it tells you things like pH. It tells you things like carbon to nitrogen ratio. So that helps you tell how stable the compost is. Remember, just because it's brown to black coloring does not ensure that the compost is fully matured. By putting a compost into your soil that's not fully matured, you can create other issues, such as that product's going to continue to try to break down and may actually rob nutrients from your soil to try and continue that process. So do your research before you buy compost, and then also remember particle size. We've talked about that several times already, but in the STA certification, they will have test results showing their sieve analysis. Typically, a compost is supposed to be 5/8 minus, so that means that 98% of the particle size will pass a 5/8 square screen, all the way down to very fine humus. And those, again, talking about particle sizes, in a compost of those particular particle sizes, 5/8 minus, that's something you can use in your soil, your yard. You can top dress your yard, or you can incorporate it into a potting mix. Something with a little bit higher quality, a larger particle size may be something that you want to incorporate into your native soil where you're going to be planting a garden or vegetable garden, or even trees. You may want to incorporate a larger particle size into the hole that you're going to plant your trees. Again, let's go to the next slide. To reemphasize, organic matter aids in the stability of soils. Again, the pore spaces and improves oxygen transfer. So what happens is, when we have a nice porous soil and the structure is correct and where it allows the moisture to penetrate, it creates a vacuum as that moisture is going down, which brings oxygen into the soil. We all know we got to have oxygen for our roots, right? So by having the pore spaces correct and getting the infiltration rate that's necessary, we can not only bring in more moisture and hold it, but we're bringing in the oxygen, helping the good bacteria and the good fungi grow. having a big microbial population is less important than having the diverse population. And each type of compost, depending on its inputs, will have different microbial activities, different strains of bacteria, different strains of mycorrhiza, and so forth, which all help that soil grow a better root system. So your plant's roots go down into the soil, and that's fantastic. But remember, they're like the highways, they're like the interstates. The main roots are like having Interstate 40 and Interstate 35. But the microbial activity in the bacteria and fungi that grow in that soil structure becomes the roads that come off of I-35 and I-40. And that is kind of like we don't live right on I-35, right? So we have to take side roads and get over I-35 to get to our destination. Well, in this case, I-35 is the main tap route to the plant, and the mycorrhiza and the bacteria and the fungi that have grown in that soil structure, or in that in the area that our main tap roots are growing, they're populating and bringing in the necessary nutrients for that plant to grow. They actually envelop the roots, and that's, I call it the Star Trek effect. That's it puts up the screen or the security around the plant so that the bad bugs have a much harder time getting to it. So we have a healthier plant, less disease, and more fruit. So healthy soils obviously make healthy crops, and the good bacteria and fungi help protect those plants. Again, can't reemphasize the importance of yeah, we may need somebody to help on the roadmap there, but that's okay. Let's go to the next screen. There you go. It's a great side by side right there. So both of them planted in the soil, but you can see what happens on the right hand side where the mycorrhiza was, and the left side, the control had no mycorrhiza added to it. So now you're seeing all of those side roads I was talking about, right? So it's funny, we can how far the mycorrhiza down in that soil affects and brings back to that plant, and protects from the bad bugs. And did I not have any words on that slide, Mark? There we go. There's what I was talking about earlier. So the most disease-causing microorganisms are anaerobic and don't do well in an oxygen-rich environment. This means that the aerobic microorganisms outcompete the bad, and that's really the key there. Is that it's not that they kill the bad bacteria, they just keep that from being able to enter into the plant, and they coat that root structure and help block infection. So anytime that you see as seen in that, illustrated in that picture, when you see that in your soil, you know you've got a great ecosystem. You know, some of the other ways that we know we have a great ecosystem is, you know, when you see worms, obviously you have a good ecosystem, you have a good structure, and they help create tunnels in your soil that are also helping bring that moisture through, and also giving a roadmap for that mycorrhiza and fungi to not fight for it. Anytime that we create a better soil structure with organic content and the microorganisms we're talking about, the root structure is able to grow at a much more rapid pace. And just like I've talked about in the past, if any of you have been to my presentations, you know, compost is like the insulation in our homes. It helps keep our soil warmer in the winter and helps keep it cooler in the summer, which helps the microbial activity stay alive and flourish. It also helps us have crops sooner and later than maybe our neighbors will. So soil structure and organic content is extremely important, as we know. Let's go ahead. Compost teas, I talked about that a little bit earlier. So simply you can do it a lot of different ways. If you look at that bottom picture there, you can use any type of cheesecloth. Even you can use cloth. Take some compost, put it in a cheesecloth bag, wrap it up, put it in a 5-gallon bucket, and aerate it with a small pump, and you will help bring all of that activity to life. And then when you water that into your plants, you're giving them basically a huge boost of not only the moisture they need, but also plant available nutrients immediately, but you're also creating the the fungi and bacteria necessary to create the mycorrhiza in your soil, making your soil much healthier and keeping the bad things out, and also keeps the bad pests away from your plants as well. Another key thing is being able to keep the bad pests away. So we've talked a lot about, let's go to the next one. We've talked a lot about soil structure and native soils, and I could get into potting soil and go on and on and on. So in potting soil, remember, there is no dirt or sand. So anytime that you're looking at a potting soil that you're going to use for your flower gardens or raised bed gardens or pots on your porch, etc., you want to stay away from any potting soil that has dirt or sand in it. That makes it a lesser expensive product, and also is not creating the environment you're looking for when wanting a potting soil. Potting soil is typically going to be a combination of compost, peat moss, coco coir, whether it's vermiculite or pumice or perlite, those types of things. And then it's going to have an inoculant package to it as well. So we talked a lot about native soils. I want to throw a little bit about potting soils there and the differences thereof. But can't overemphasize the top dress your soil with compost. When you use a pre-amended soil, you still want to add compost in it. So a lot of times you'll see or people will purchase soil from their local big box store, let's say. It definitely does not have the necessary nutrients in it for you to just put that down in your flower bed and start growing great product. You need to amend with additional compost. And I would start with a rate of about 30% by volume. So at 30%, you're definitely going to start seeing a difference immediately. But don't forget that you need to add that all the time. So every spring, every fall. Our soil is just like us. It needs to eat, it needs moisture, and it needs air to stay alive. And by adding that compost, you're giving it more product to continue to eat. We definitely deplete that product. We deplete the organic matter in our soil as our plants grow. And so we need to continually re-amend that. What kind of compost is best for that? Typically, if you're going to top dress your yard, you're going to want to stay with that 5/8 minus type product. Again, refer to the STA compost at your U.S. Composting Council. They will give you the certified places to purchase that from. So another thing that we talk about a lot in soil, or you hear a lot in soil, is pH ratings. I've learned a lot actually in the last 2 years about compost and pH. There was a time when I felt that compost was going to be basically a neutral pH or even lower than neutral, giving a good buffer to native soils to help bring that pH down. In the central part of Oklahoma, our pH levels are typically in the high 7s to low 8s, where obviously our Bermuda grass does great, but other plants may not. By using compost, you can buffer the pH down, and compost actually buffers pH immediately. So a thing to pay attention to when purchasing your compost is the pH levels. One compost to stay away from if you're worried about pH is cotton burr compost. It's typically in the mid-8 pH range. So if you have a 7 pH soil, it's going to buffer your pH higher, not lower. Whereas when you talk about something such as fruits and vegetable based composts, you're going to see it have a lower pH, and it will immediately buffer your pH down in your soil. So how important is pH for our normal plants? Not that important. As long as we have a good soil structure and we have enough organic matter, typically you're going to be fine. Whereas if you're talking about cannabis and the industry we've been talking about today, typically they need to have a much lower pH than we're used to. Like I said, if we're going to be in the mid-7s with our native soil, we need to get that down to around 6. So you're going to want to have a pH that's in the mid-5s to a 6 to help immediately buffer that pH back down. Now, there are other ways we can accomplish that. And I know I'm talking about compost, but I'll throw in another natural product that's overlooked, and that's gypsum. By adding gypsum to your soil, you will increase moisture holding capacity, and you will reduce pH over time. So something very important to stay with. I know I'm bumping my time here, so I'm trying to go about done with time, I guess. Let's go to the next slide, and I believe we're about done. Yeah, I love this part. If the plants are greener on the other side, they use compost. So compost fixes everything. Remember that. Do we have any questions, or did I fill it all?
I have a question. So you mentioned that the different biological activity can affect the health of the flowers. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So depending on which plant you're talking about, but really it doesn't matter. So compost aids in, we have three stages of the plant we need to worry about, right? The below ground is our root system. Then above ground, we have green and growth, and then we also have fruit. So it doesn't matter if you're growing cannabis and you're looking for buds, or if you're growing roses and you're looking for beautiful flowers. So the compost itself is it doesn't only take care of what's underground in giving us a better structure and allowing more moisture and so forth. It allows the exchange of nutrients from the soil to the plant, which that's going to help grow the plant above ground, right? But it's also helping that the interstate highway system below ground, bring that in. But then it also helps in phosphorus and potassium, which is our above ground. And the reason that it helps, even though they may not be high in phosphorus or potassium, it helps aid bringing that potassium and phosphorus out of the ground and into the plant and giving it the proper exchange rate, if you will. And that's that CEC I was talking about. And that's why I love worm castings for that. Arguably the best compost out there for that exchange rate is definitely worm castings. And that's why I was talking about having a diverse amounts of compost, different types of compost in your soil. I strongly recommend anytime that you're going to plant to use a little bit of worm castings as a insurance or a security blanket, if you will, as you're transplanting. Throw a handful of worm castings in your hole and you'll see a tremendous difference. Do one with it, do one without. You'll see the difference, I'll guarantee, in a matter of weeks. Yeah, outdoor versus indoor. So I've got a question about, go ahead, Kelly, sorry.
I was going to say, I second Jason. I've done that experiment and it has gone exactly the way he said. Yeah,
it's an amazing product. It really is. So the question is specific advice for outdoor versus indoor cannabis. Absolutely. So on an indoor level, we're definitely not going to be using native soil, typically because of weight. Also because it's not of the proper structure right off the bat. So we're going to use a potting soil for that. And we're going to use a soil that's, again, like I was saying earlier, peat moss, cocoa. And then from that point, different people have different suggestions. My suggestion is no more than 30% by volume compost and variations thereof. So worm castings and compost combined at a 30% ratio. And then something else to aerate / retain moisture. So you can use rice hulls, you can use perlite, you can use pumice, you can use vermiculite. On an indoor basis, typically the people growing in that environment want to be able to feed more frequently. And so they want that soil to not only they want the soil to allow the moisture to infiltrate quickly and fill that entire pot so that all of the soil is being used for the plants. But yet they want it to dry out quickly so that they can water again, which equals feed, right? So every time we add water, the plant is sucking that up and taking nutrients in. So we want it to hold water for a couple of days, but yet dry out so that we have to water again. Whereas outdoor, we definitely need to hold the water more, especially in Oklahoma, where we have not only the sun, but we have consistent wind. And the wind is like a wick and draws that moisture out of the ground. So in an outdoor basis, we're definitely going to want to have a higher volume of organic content in that soil. When I say that, the reason is the potting soil indoors, the moisture, the peat moss and the cocoa are also holding moisture, right? We're not just relying on that compost to hold the moisture, whereas in an outdoor setting, If we have a sandy soil, that water is going to penetrate and keep on moving. So we need a higher level of compost to help the structure of that soil and also help retain that moisture. Also, same thing, if you have a clay soil, what's happening is you may be able to get moisture penetration in the top few inches, but not deeper than that. So that's why we need a higher level of compost in that soil as well. So in a potting mix, we want to stay around that 30% or so, whereas in an outdoor setting, you may incorporate 50 or 60% into 6 to 8 inches of soil, and then continually top feed that. And then don't forget this, it's very important on the whether you're indoor or outdoor. So if you have a good high quality potting soil, or you made a mistake and bought a lower quality potting soil, when you water, you'll see it over time, it'll start crusting on top of that pot. Remember, when we water, we create compaction. So it's very important that the soil structure is correct so that we can eliminate that compaction and let that moisture drain in, which, remember what we were talking about, it draws the oxygen in at the same time. It creates a vacuum, it brings oxygen into the soil. So as being in the outdoor setting, you're going to want a higher level of organic matters / compost from the beginning. And then after that, you're able to maintain that by continually top dressing. And then, as I was saying earlier, you may want something more like mixed compost, where you've got a range of particle size using as a mulch layer on top to help eliminate that compaction, but also still retain moisture. And it's that buffer, it's that insulation layer between the soil and the wind that's wicking that moisture out of the soil. Thanks, appreciate it.
Do we have any other questions for Jason? Or Nick? Okay, if we have no other questions, we'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So be back here 11:16. Jason, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you as well, appreciate it.
All right, hopefully most of you guys are back with us. So we are going to move on to our final presenter, Jaren from OMMA. Jaren, we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. I've learned so much in the last hour about composting. I'm actually really excited. Like I said, I didn't know a lot of that information, so I'm glad that I'm here. I'm going to talk primarily about Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, and some in regards to composting, but primarily just an overview of the agency and some things that we're working on and things that we're doing. So as you can see here, I'm the agency liaison here at work. That means I work with a lot of the other state agencies, DEQ, Department of Ag, Water Resource Board, etc., and just about creating policy and trying to get a handle on the cannabis industry in Oklahoma. And so, as many of you are aware, this was passed with State Question 788. It's extremely, the amount of growth we've had over the past 3 years has been extremely rapid. And so we are growing as an agency. We initially started out with about 60 inspectors, and we're finally getting up there, beefing up our staff so that we can do a better job of regulating the industry. I think we're sitting somewhere around 140 inspectors at this point. And so we just continue to staff up because, once again, the industry is rapidly growing. Just some information for you. There are no caps on the number of business license. There's no moratorium authority to pause license processing. So as they come in, we have to process them. And then makes it a little unique to our state. There's no qualifying conditions. So almost all medical states that have a list of qualifying conditions to be eligible for a patient. Oklahoma does not have that. And we also have a quality assurance lab in our state, which a lot of states, they don't have that either. And so, like I said, this is all relatively new to us here in Oklahoma. And so we're doing the best job that we can to kind of get a handle on the industry. It's just some of our licensing reports that we pulled recently. We have 386,000 patient licenses. If you are a caregiver, we can give you a caregiver license, and there's 1,900 of those. And then if you look at the business licenses, what I was talking about earlier, we have, and these numbers are actually from about a month and a half ago, so they just have continued to grow. We're actually close to about 9,000 grows at this point in the state. We have around 2,300 dispensaries, 1,500 processors. And then there's companies that do transportation. So they actually get a transporter license and they deliver the products all over the state. And then we have 28 laboratories. And then as you can see on the right, we only have 9 waste disposal. The wasting permit, the one waste permit, I could get into specifics about that, but then that would take up a lot of time in itself. But it goes along the same lines as the waste disposal. And then we have a researcher, and then we have 2 education facilities in our state. And so here is just a picture. And once again, this information is on our website, but it basically depicts the number of licenses by county and shows the number of grows, processors, and dispensaries by county. This is actually a really interesting map, as you can imagine. Oklahoma and Tulsa counties have the most facilities. But what's interesting to me is the number of facilities we have that border some of our neighboring states. Like if you look at the Arkansas border, which would be over to our east, it's quite busy, a lot of dark green. And so it's just an interesting map to look at. We publish this monthly on our website. And once again, you can kind of see out west, there's not a lot of activity, but we definitely have a lot of dispensaries, grows specifically out east in eastern Oklahoma, and then also some processors and some labs as well. And so if you would like a waste disposal license with OMMA, commercial licensees must use licensed waste facilities to dispose of medical marijuana. It's medical marijuana waste is considered unused, or there's a surplus, or it's returned, it's out of date, it's recalled, or there's plant debris of the plant of the genus cannabis, including dead plants and all unused plant parts. With this waste disposal, and I think it's in a future slide, I'm just trying to hit it all off the top of my head. You do have to get a permit with Department of Environmental Quality here in Oklahoma. In fact, they're probably more of the experts on the composting side and the waste disposal side of our permitting process for waste disposal. They would have more information about that than we would. If you visit their website, and I think I put a link on here, but you do have to, through the application process, it lists out specifics in regards to composting and what the rules are if you would like to be a composter here in the state of Oklahoma for medical marijuana. So DEQ, once again, is we kind of default to them as far as they have the information, and they're the ones who do the inspections and things like of that nature. So. And then commercial licensees dispose of roots, stems, stalks, fan leaves, seeds. This is all on-site. It says it's not considered medical marijuana waste by law, but you can get rid of it through the variety of these methods. There's open burning, there's incineration, there's burying, mulching, and then composting, obviously. And so then there's a checklist that I linked down there, and that's through DEQ, and then you have to apply and be approved by DEQ as well. And then you have to keep a log, a running log of the disposal. And then these are our storage requirements for commercial licensees. You have to store medical marijuana waste in secure waste receptacles. You have to store those receptacles in a limited access area. You have to post a sign that's 12 by 12 that states "Do not enter limited access area." And then underneath that, it says access limited to licensed owners, employees, and contractors only. And then there's lettering requirements for that signage. And then just secure limited access area with commercial grade to non-residential locks, which that's just a locking system. Make sure that the door is secure and that no one has access to it except for the owners, employees, and contractors.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. Thank you to all the DEQ folks that answered questions. I sent out your emails to people in the chat, so you guys might be getting some emails heads up. I wanted to let you guys know we do have a couple events coming up with OCASA. We're going to be tabling at the Merion Guarded School on March 13th, but we have a really big event on May 7th. Is that right, Mark? May 7th? May 7th, we're going to be doing the Compost Festival, and that is going to be at Scissortail Park. If you've attended the conference, it's going to be way different than that. It's just like going to be a big compost party. We're going to have a lot of vendors. It'll be hands-on. There'll be some workshops. It'll be a really fun outdoor event. So you guys, if you're interested, put that on your calendar. And we're so happy that you guys were all here. If there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.